Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to trace the story of Adolf Hitler. We'll look at his journey from a complete unknown in Vienna to the man who started a world war and orchestrated a genocide, all the way to his final, pathetic hours in a bunker deep beneath Berlin.
We're actually going to start at the end. The year is 1945, and the setting, well, it's not some grand palace. It's a damp concrete tomb, 50 feet underground, buried beneath the rubble of a city in ruins. Imagine the air, thick with the smell of diesel fumes, and this constant hum from the ventilation system that gave everyone a splitting headache. This was the Führerbunker, the very last headquarters of a regime that was collapsing in on itself.
And in this grim, sordid place was the man himself. But this wasn't the powerful demagogue you see in the old newsreels, no. The people who were there said he was a stooped old man, his face a pasty white, his left arm shaking so violently that he had to grip it with his right. He was only 56 years old, but he looked like he was well into his 70s, a total physical wreck, shouting orders to armies that didn't exist anymore, all while Soviet artillery shells were shaking the ground above his head.
So, this brings us to the big, haunting question, right? How on earth does a failed artist, a guy who was literally homeless in Vienna, rise up to command millions and plunge the entire world into its deadliest war? To really get a grip on that ruinous end in the bunker, we have to go all the way back to the beginning.
So how did a transformation like this even happen? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was kind of a perfect storm of his own personal failures, the historical situation at the time, and a really terrifying talent for turning hatred into a political weapon.
What's so wild about this timeline is how failure, again and again, actually fueled his rise. He gets rejected from art school, which pushes him into poverty, and that's where all his resentments really start to fester. Then, Germany loses World War I, and suddenly he has a cause. Even when he tries to seize power by force in 1923 and fails spectacularly, that failure teaches him a vital lesson. You don't overthrow a democracy with force. You use its own rules to tear it down from the inside.
And this slide really gets to the heart of it. It shows you the two faces of his movement. You see, to the German people who were humiliated after the war and crushed by a terrible economy, he was offering this really seductive promise of salvation. But that entire promise was built on a foundation of absolute brutality. He didn't just sell a positive vision, he was basically marketing resentment. He told Germans over and over that their problems weren't their fault. No, it was the fault of this huge conspiracy that only he was strong enough to defeat.
So, once he gets into office, the really crucial thing to see is how incredibly fast he turns his legal position as chancellor into absolute unchecked power. The conservative politicians who helped him get there, they thought they could control him. They thought they had hired him for a job. It turned out to be one of the most catastrophic miscalculations in all of human history.
I mean, just look at the speed of this. He becomes chancellor, and within a month, the parliament building burns down, and he uses it as an excuse to suspend basic civil rights. A month after that, the Enabling Act is passed, which basically makes him a legal dictator. Then, he turns on his own people, murdering hundreds of his early followers to get rid of any potential rivals. Finally, when the old president Hindenburg dies, he just combines the two top jobs into one. In just a year and a half, German democracy was completely and utterly gone.
And at the very core of all of this was this obsessive, sick hatred. This quote here is from his final political testament, which he dictated in the bunker right before he killed himself. It shows you that even with his entire world literally collapsing around him, his hateful worldview never changed one bit. The racist ideas he'd written about years before in his book Mein Kampf became the official policy of the state, and that led directly to persecution and ultimately to the Holocaust.
The scale of the destruction is it's staggering. An estimated 6 million Jewish people were systematically murdered. And this wasn't some byproduct of the war. For the Nazi regime, it was a central goal. It was carried out with cold, industrial efficiency in death camps that were built for that one single horrifying purpose. And the killing didn't stop there. At least 5 million other people were
talking Roma, political opponents, homosexuals, people with disabilities, and many others were also targeted and systematically killed by the regime.
Now, you zoom out and look at the total death toll of World War II, the global war that he himself started when he invaded Poland in 1939. The number is estimated to be over 50 million people. It was a war of conquest and racial annihilation that left an entire continent in ashes.
Okay, so let's go back to that bunker to witness the truly pathetic end of all that immense power. As the Soviet Red Army was closing in, the last days of the Third Reich played out like some surreal, underground psychological drama. The final act was just this bizarre mix of delusion and this kind of grand operatic self-destruction. One minute he's screaming about betrayal, the next he's getting married to his longtime mistress in a midnight ceremony as bombs are falling outside. His main concern, in the end, wasn't the German people suffering above ground, it was making sure that his body wouldn't be captured and put on display like Mussolini's had been. And this letter from Eva Braun, written just a few days before the end, it really captures that atmosphere of despair and this sort of deluded loyalty. It shows that they had already decided on suicide more than a week before they actually did it. It's a strange mix of personal agony and this weird romanticized devotion to the man who was leading them all to their deaths. It turns out Hitler's paranoia wasn't entirely unfounded. His last days were basically defined by the treachery of his most powerful followers. Goering, his number 2, tried to take over too early, and Himmler, the architect of the Holocaust, tried to save his own skin by negotiating a surrender with the Allies behind his back. The very men who helped him build the entire regime were now scrambling to get off the sinking ship. So what happened after the smoke finally cleared? Hitler was dead, sure, but the poison of his ideas lived on, and it all started with one final act of disinformation about what happened to his own body. This is just a perfect example of how propaganda can outlive the propagandist. The Soviets had the physical evidence. They found the charred remains, and they were positively identified by Hitler's very unique dental work. But Stalin, he chose to lie. He told the other world leaders that Hitler had gotten away. And just like that, he created a myth that fueled conspiracy theories for decades. It was one last cynical propaganda move designed to create distrust among the Allies right as the war was ending. In the end, looking back at all this history, it's not just an academic exercise. It's a warning. It shows how a combination of economic crisis, national humiliation, and the power of a really big lie can lift a hateful demagogue to a position of absolute power.